Dobrý večer.
Good evening.
Na dnešním Heurékafe jsme moc rádi, že jste
Heurékafe.
vy tady v sále, stejně tak jako vy, kteří nás sledujete online.
And we'd like to welcome those who follow us online. Heurékafe is a place where we invite people who inspire us, enrich us, or we can learn something new from them. And we are very glad that we can share the insights with you.
Tentokrát se s naším hostem ponoříme hlouběji. A to hlouběji do myšlení.
Our guest will help
Budeme si
us
povídat
dive
o
deeper into
kultuře myšlení,
thinking. We'll be
jak
discussing
vést děti
thinking
hlubšímu
culture
přemýšlení a
and how to make children
Dozvíme se
think more
například,
deeply
proč je
and
dobré
why
myšlet
in the
viditelně.
first place. Why is it good to
moc
make
rádi,
thinking
že
visible,
pozvání
for
do
example,
Heuréky
and we are very glad
přijal
that
Mark
our
Church,
invitation has been
expert
accepted
na rozvoj
by
kultury
Mark
myšlení,
Church,
konzultant
an
projektu Zero
expert
Harvardovy
in
univerzity
learning,
a spoluautor
consultant
konceptu
of Harvard
Visible Thinking.
Project Zero and
Mark spolupracuje také
co-author
se
of
školami
the
po celém
Visible
světě
Thinking
a
concept.
jim pomáhá
Mark has
vytvářet
been
kulturu myšlení ve
cooperating
třídách.
with
Marku,
international
vítejte.
schools worldwide. Mark, welcome.
Zároveň mi dovolte
At the
přivítat
same
Jana
time,
Kalu,
I'd like to
zakladatele
welcome
škol
Jan
Heuréka,
Kala, the
který
founder
nás
of
dnes
Heuréka
celým večerem
schools,
bude provázet
who's
a
going to
Markovi
be
bude
our
pokládat
moderator
otázky.
and will ask Mark all those questions.
Na závěr bude prostor také pro dotazy.
At the end,
Prosíme vás tady v
we will have
sále,
a
abyste
Q&A
počkali na
session,
mikrofon a své
so
otázky pokládali
please,
na mikrofon.
before you pose
diváci,
your
kteří nás
question,
sledují
you need to
online,
wait for a
můžou
mic,
pokládat své
and
dotazy
those
do
who
chatu.
are watching
My
us
si je všechny
online
projdeme a určitě
can use
se budeme
chat
snažit je
for their
zprostředkovat.
questions, and we'll go through that and we'll do our best to answer them all. Now please take your seats, make yourself comfortable, and we are going to launch this Heurékafe. Honza,
Thank you very much, Sil.
over to you.
Good evening, Mark. Good evening. Good evening to everybody in Libochovičky in the audience, and good evening to everybody watching us online. Mark, thank you so much for coming to Heuréka in Libochovičky. I know that you travel all around the world to major cities to help the best teachers to become even better teachers. So I got one geographical question in the beginning.
Let's do it.
How many approximately people do you think live in this municipality?
I know the answer to that.
You know?
Yeah. 147,528.
Close.
Am I close?
Yeah.
It was a guess. What is it? What is it?
Approximately 80.
80,000.
No.
Approximately 80?
Yes. It's
80
actually
people.
81.
81 people.
Yeah.
Well, what a lovely 81 people it is.
So
I have big dreams for you.
So I have a question, whether you ever had a speech or interview in such a small place?
You know, I think maybe I've had some conversation in other places that were small, but not as nice as this place.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do you like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Mark, I have a little bit personal question. You have taught in several international schools. I know in the International School of Amsterdam, right, which is known as one of the best international schools in Europe. You taught in Japan, in the United States, in Germany.
In Germany, yep.
Yeah. So I wonder, what did you move from international school teaching to Harvard Project Zero?
Oh, why did I move, or how did I?
Yeah,
move?
why and how? Yeah, whatever.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. I grew up in the United States, but I lived in Japan when I was in my 20s, and then I moved into international schools, the International School of Düsseldorf in Germany, just a little north of Cologne, and then to Amsterdam. When I was in Düsseldorf, that international school, together with the international school in Amsterdam and the American School of The Hague, the International School of Brussels, Antwerp International School, Antwerpen in Belgium, and the International School of Stavanger in Norway. those 6 schools formed a cohort to have a project together with Harvard University researchers. This was 1996, 1997. And the research project out of Harvard at the time was about teaching for understanding. What is understanding? How does it develop? How do we know when students understand? What's worth understanding? And so I was a teacher in the classroom, and I was part of a study group of teachers that joined into that project. And I became very curious about those questions. Because as a teacher, I knew I could get my students to complete the exercises. Yeah. I knew I could get them to do all the work. But I also knew that 2 weeks later, I would see my students, when they came to a new situation, they didn't know what to do with it. Because they learned it for the moment, but they didn't walk with it. And I thought that was really puzzling. I want my students to understand this, and it looked like they understood, but now they can't operate with it. Yeah. So the questions of Project Zero became something I became very curious about and interested in, and then I continued in that and talking with other colleagues, and eventually there was work at Harvard, Project Zero, and they said, would you like to come and join and do some work with us? And so I took the opportunity.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
But it started with some curiosity.
Yeah. So we are getting to your main focus, right, which is the culture of thinking. Please, could you describe a little bit what do you mean by culture of thinking?
Just a little bit?
Yeah, not more than 3 hours.
Cultures of thinking, that research work in particular, is one of the research projects out of Harvard University's Project Zero. Project Zero is a research group. That's the name of a group, not a name of a particular project.
So, sorry, why is it called Project Zero? I got the idea probably, but I don't know whether it's correct.
Oh, okay. We'll go down that. So Project Zero got started more than 60 years ago. There was Nelson Goodman, I believe, was the researcher at the time at Harvard in the Graduate School of Education and in psychology as well. And he had 2 graduate students, Howard Gardner and David Perkins. And they got a big research project to look at the arts and how does the arts support learning, how does learning leverage the arts. And there was no research done around that at the time, so they called that project Project Zero. Okay. And then that name stuck. So over the 60 years, it's that project has come and gone, but Project Zero itself is a group of researchers that look into big issues of teaching and learning and understanding, and there's still a strong arts component too. But the cultures of thinking work in particular comes from my colleague, Dr. Ron Richart. He was very interested in classrooms where students were really developing and deepening understanding, not just performing and then forgetting. But he was very interested in what's making those classrooms flourish. And what he noticed is those classrooms, one thing is those classrooms were focused on developing students' thinking dispositions, not just covering the material, but really promoting students' thinking habits. And so that began his journey, and then he was one of the researchers, early researchers that I started working with around, okay, what would it mean for my classroom to become a culture where those thinking dispositions grow in service of the content that we're teaching?
Okay, thank you.
I have another answer, though. I have another answer on that, though, because people sometimes think cultures of thinking, it's a new thing. It's a new idea. But I would suggest it's not a new idea. I would ask everybody in this room, think of a group that you've been a part of that did really good thinking together. And that thinking forever changed your learning. So if you think of a group you've been a part of, Maybe it was a service group. Maybe it was a club. Maybe it was a church group or something. I don't know.
Maybe even work, right? Could happen, right?
It could be.
Not often.
But everybody will, if you think about it long enough, there's been a group it could be a family, right? Yeah. Sometimes they're family. And so people have the experience of, oh, that was a group. It wasn't just a fun group. It wasn't just a nice group. It was a group where the thinking was so rich and it had impact on my learning. It changed my learning. I asked people to describe it. Oh, everybody had a voice. We could look at things from different points of view. We asked questions. We were not afraid to make mistakes. We had a goal. People describe that. And we would say, that's a culture of thinking. Right? There was a chance for your thinking to be visible. There was a chance for your thinking to be valued. And your thinking drove the learning. That's a culture of thinking. We've all been a part of a culture of thinking before. So it's not a new thing. We're just trying to name it.
Yeah. And we also all remember the classroom we went to, right? With a teacher in front and then, the rows. Yeah. So how would you describe the difference between the design of a classroom, which just delivers content, and the thinking classroom? So we can have a kind of imagine what it might look like.
Yeah, that's a very good example. Many people say, oh, I was taught in a very traditional way. And they describe what you just said. The teacher disseminated the information, and my job was to take in that information, right? But I wouldn't say that's how humans have learned throughout history. I mean, humans were learning, let's say, with Socrates. Socrates was the master of what makes you say that. Yeah. Right? And so schools created this image that you described. Yeah. But that's not how humans have learned traditionally. Right? Humans have learned by looking closely and making connections and questioning. But even in the situation you described, when I was in the school, my job was just to take in the information of the teacher. I would say even that was a culture of thinking. But what I would say is, what kind of thinking was it a culture of? And I would say it was a culture where memorizing, absorbing was what was valued. But indeed, that was the culture of thinking that you had.
Okay, and in your books you write about powerful learning. So what are the conditions like teachers or even parents could create for our children so the powerful learning can happen, actually? And maybe additional question, how do we recognize whether students' learning is powerful or is not powerful?
On the last bit of what you just asked, how do I know whether they've learned something, if they've understood something? In my mind, I really know my students understand if they can take what they know into new situations. Yeah. If they can work with it flexibly in new situations. So much of school, like the school you described a moment ago, just taking the information, so much of that was about teaching for the known. Yeah. But what we would say is, how are we teaching for the unknown? Yeah. Really, because that's what we face as adults. We face unknown situations all the time. So they've understood something or learned something powerfully and deeply if they can walk with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's my actually next question. As the pace of changing is increasing, it's obvious that the children have to learn how to transfer their knowledge and skills into situations which are maybe even not unknown today, right? So how to teach that, actually, how to teach the kids such a skill of transfer.
Yeah, that's a big question. Something I just want to check out with you first, It's been said, this isn't, I can't remember who to attribute this quote to, but it's been said, like, as teachers, I can never make another human being learn. I don't have that power. I cannot make another human learn, whether that human is 5, whether that human's 15, whether that human's in their 50s. Right? The learning that has to be done by that human. So as a teacher, I can never make someone learn. What I can do is create the conditions for that learning.
Thank you for that.
And so that's the big question that our project always asks is, what conditions am I creating, or better yet, are we creating in our classrooms whereby students can not only learn the content, but they can work with it. They can look closely at it. They can make connections with it. So that content, not only they can assimilate the content, but they can also transfer it. They can work with it in new situations.
Yeah, and if you create such an environment, and then what about students which are not maybe so precise thinkers, and they see world more from like pictures or sounds or music, or what do you think about those students? Are they able to learn deep thinking through the thinking classroom?
Well, that's a yes or no question, so I'll just say yes. I think they can. I think humans are highly capable. I mean, we've survived for millennia, right? And humans have been trying to understand things in their world.
Because what I mean is, like, if you describe like situation that you had deep discussions, right, and deep thinking, and usually, or sometimes might happen that you might have 5 people in a group, and 3 of them very much enjoy, right, and 2 of them just listen.
Yeah. Well, that could be said for any time that students have been in schools, right? For me, I always think, how are we creating the conditions where learning is accessible? I want to make sure that the students I'm teaching have as many ways of looking at this world as possible. And when they're our age, they can decide what part of the world they don't want to look at. They can decide what part of the world they don't want to engage in. But while they're with us, I want to create as many ways for them to access that world. And so we've always, in this profession, we've always had students of different abilities and different needs and different ways of being. None of our students have ever come to us standardized. So why do we think that if we standardize school, somehow, some way, we're all giving everybody the same treatment? But humans don't come standardized. And so I always think, are students capable of deep thinking? I think they're humans, aren't they? They try to make sense of the world, so they must be able to do some thinking.
I think it might be even more helpful for them, right? Because like the top thinking students, they make their thoughts anyway, right? But those students which might not be so deep thinkers, like the working in a group with other students might be very much useful for them to go deeper than they would go on their own, which normally the schools do, right? Normally a lot of schools do that. The students work just individually, are on their own, right? Do your thinking or you don't, but it's your turn basically, right? But working in a group might help maybe even the weaker students to go deeper, right?
Yes. I mean, some of what you're mentioning here is like, how are we defining top students? The top as in... Because I think my experience has been in some of the traditional schoolings that you're talking about, the students who perform very well actually do the lowest level thinking. They've gotten very good at just memory and recall. Memory and recall. And that's been rewarded in the school systems. And so I don't want to speak poorly of those students. They're just trying to do good. But they've learned the game of school. And I want to just share a story that I think could be helpful here. My colleague Ron Richard, who I spoke of, who's creator of this work, he was giving a talk once, an evening like this, with people in the United States, the state of Michigan. He was working with lots of schools there that were engaged with these ideas, paying attention to students' thinking habits, trying to teach them in meaningful ways. The project was being funded by a big pharmaceutical company. It was part of their philanthropy. So they were giving money so that the government-funded schools could have money for professional learning. Dow Chemical, if you're familiar with that pharmaceutical company, Dow. Anyway, the CEO of and president of that company, she was at that talk that evening, much like we're having here. She came up to Ron afterwards, Dr. Richard, and said, "I'm very glad we are funding this project, and I'm even more glad now, and let me tell you why." She said, "I'm, the president, the CEO of this big pharmaceutical company, but I'm actually a chemist. I didn't come here from other business. I started out as a chemist. I've always been a chemist. I started in this company, and I've worked my way up." She said, "Some years ago, I was a project manager, and I was in charge of projects at Dow Chemical, and we would get these graduates from the best universities, the top universities, all these young university graduates who all have their chemistry degrees, and they want to get a job here at Dow Chemical. And they would come, and we would be in a project, and they would get stuck. And they would come to me, and they would say, 'What am I supposed to do? I'm stuck. What am I supposed to do?' And she said, what I learned to say then to them is, in the real world of chemistry, we don't work on the problems that we already know the answers to. In the real world of chemistry, we work on the problems that we don't know the answers to. So if I could tell you what to do, we wouldn't be working on this project." Why I'm telling you that story right now is I think that maybe sums up what we're talking about here. Best and the brightest students, they got what you might describe as the top students. They know the knowledge of chemistry, but if they can't look closely and raise questions and develop theories and reason with evidence and uncover complexity, if they can't think with it, then what good was being top? Yeah. If not just satisfying the game. And so I think that goes to say, in our classrooms, how are we creating the conditions whereby we're not just rewarding or creating the conditions where students are they can get the top or the success by just memory alone? Because memory alone won't work in the real world. Yeah. That wasn't a short answer. That was a long one.
Actually, that was answer to my next question.
Oh, good. I'm just getting started.
And what do you think about parents? How can we as parents help our children to become deep and flexible thinkers?
Deep and flexible thinkers. Well, one thing that I want to just maybe say up front that this idea of deep thinking doesn't need to be so hard.
Yeah, so deep.
It doesn't need to be so hard. How do I want to say it? Sometimes I'm working with high school teachers. I'll come back around to the parents in a moment. Sometimes I'm working with high school teachers, and the high school teachers say, "I like this thinking, but my students don't want to think. They don't know how to think. They just want to know what's on the test." Right? They don't know how to think. I said, let's go to the preschool. Let's go watch the 3 and the 4-year-olds. Because if you watch the 3 and the 4-year-olds, you watch them at play, we could get lost in the cuteness. Oh, it's so cute, it's charming. But I would press you to dig deeper. What you see them doing is looking closely, developing theories, testing ideas. That's what they're doing in that play. Many of these thinking moves that you've got here, right? You see the students building the blocks, going higher and higher, and then it falls down. And the next thing you know, they regroup and they build the base bigger so it stands. So those children are thinking, and they're thinking deeply. So the question isn't how do we get them to think and think deeply? The question is how do we not get in the way? That's what I think. I worry about school because I think sometimes school starts to take it out of them. And so for parents, you ask for parents, I think the number one thing parents can do is engage in conversation with your children. Ask what makes you say that. You hear your children say things all the time, like, and when have you ever stopped? Well, what did you see that makes you say that? Tell me a little bit more about that. Like conveying curiosity in how they're making sense of ideas will send a message. Yeah, it's valued here.
Yeah,
that's one way. Just be curious. Yeah. I know that parenting life gets very busy, and we just need to get in the car and get going. But I think the parents that show a lot of interest and curiosity and ask questions and engage in conversation, I think that is maybe the number one way we can help support students to keep growing in that independence and agency.
Okay, thank you. So now I would like to have a closer look at the visible thinking concept.
Sure.
So why do you think it's so important to make student thinking visible?
Well, I think that's a good question to ask. Why we think it's so important to bring attention to students' thinking. And I would say there's a premise that underpins our work. We have a certain belief. We believe that learning is a consequence of thinking. If you've ever learned something, it's a result of your head having gotten in it somehow, some way. Right? And so if we want students to learn while they're with us in school, then we have to ask ourselves what kind of thinking moves do students do while they're with us? And I think when teachers get very busy with a lot of curriculum to cover and too little time to get it done, that teaching for coverage, it's in many ways the enemy of understanding.
Okay, but probably many teachers would ask you the question, right? What shall I do if I have to cover all the content and standards? I don't have time, right, for thinking. So what would you say to those teachers, right? You probably answered that question 1,000 times already, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's a real tension that they're mentioning, right? These are not people who are jaded or burnt out. A lot of people face that. I've got a lot of... I like all this thinking stuff, but what about the curriculum? I got all this curriculum to teach. And that's a real fault line for people. Sometimes people say, do I teach for content or do I teach for thinking? Do I teach for content or do I teach for thinking? My response to that is generally, yes. And they'll say, which is it? Content or thinking? And I say, yes. Right? And part of that is to draw attention that you've just put a dichotomy there. It's either this or that. In our project, what we've always thought about is our goal is how do we develop students' thinking habits, their thinking dispositions, in service of understanding content? And then how does the content help create more opportunities for thinking moves, which then takes us more into the content, right? Sometimes I've heard teachers say, I've got a lot of content to teach. I like all of this thinking, but I've got a lot of content to teach. I'm always listening for the next part. I've got a lot of content to teach, so the thinking moves I will require of my students shall be dot, dot, dot. I'm always waiting for that. I rarely hear people's response to that. But the truth is, I've got a lot of content to teach. Yes, you do. What kind of thinking moves must a student make to access that content, to grapple with that content, to take it in, for it to stick? If memory alone is where you want to invest in, because it's going to serve those students really well in the here and now and long into the future, then you should build a culture where absorption rules. Yeah. But we also know that memory alone can only get you so far. To really understand something and work with it in new situations, like those Dow chemists, they've got to do more with the content than just memorize it. So it's a real bind because people feel like they've got a lot to do, too little time. So the most efficient way is just have kids memorize it. But if it doesn't stick, and if they can't be empowered with it 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 2 months later, then what good was all that time?
Yeah. And you are not even talking about that it could lead to total misunderstanding, right?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I've gotten many times where I could get my students to do things that they don't understand.
Yeah.
And so therefore...
Or understand in a totally wrong way, right?
Or they understand it wrong, or they just memorize the tricks, but they don't know when to apply what. And so that's just not very empowering.
Yeah. So how does the role of students and teachers changes in if you want to build a culture of thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, because indeed every classroom, the students are cast in a certain role and the teacher is taking on a role. And I think for students, whatever role, R-O-L-E, role, whatever role that you're cast in, that's the role you get good at. So if we think about if you had a role in a play, if you play that part every day, that's the role you get good at. So if the students are always cast in a passive recipient role, then that's the role they get good at. And then that's why when they get into university, they can't have those deeper conversations because I've never played that part before. So when a culture of thinking looms large, you start to notice the students in a more active, constructive mode. You see them grappling with big questions. You see them looking for connections. You see them uncovering complexity. There's time for their questions to really drive the learning. And I think the number one shift for teachers, they shift from the role of just disseminating the information to becoming more orchestrators of the learning, more facilitators. You see them listening more in their own classroom. And when they listen more, their questions get better. And so you see a richer interaction. So the roles can change significantly from just dissemination to now interaction.
Yeah. In your book, you write that teachers become students of their students. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think the idea of making my students' thinking visible, what that really means is I'm trying to understand what my students are understanding. So I was a teacher for many years myself, and so on a Sunday night before the week began, I'm at my dining room table and I'm sort of sorting out the lessons. I know my curriculum. I know my assessment standards. I know the program. I know the pacing guide. I have all those puzzle pieces to help me make my plans. I know what it means to teach 11, 12, 13-year-olds because I've taught them many years. I know mathematics. I taught mathematics for a long time. I have all of that to plan with on a Sunday night before the week. The one puzzle piece I don't have is how this group of 11-year-olds are understanding the material. The questions they have, the ideas they have, the conceptions, the misconceptions they may have. Like, that's the puzzle piece I don't have. And so if I want to teach them and teach them well, I need to get that puzzle piece out. I need to make their thinking visible. Therefore, I'm trying to become a student of my students. I'm trying to pay attention to them, to listen closely, to try to understand how they're making sense of things. Because I can tell them what to think and then have them regurgitate that back to me, but that doesn't mean they understand it. Yeah. Right? So being a student of my students, that means trying to really notice how they're making sense of ideas. What kinds of questions are they asking? And how does that inform me as a teacher so that I can push into that and build on it?
Okay. Thank you. You, in your books, Making Thinking Visible and the Power of Making Thinking Visible, you use the concept of 8 thinking moves, which are either over there actually as well, now in English and Czech over here. Please, can you describe a little bit what do you mean by a thinking move? It's not a common word in Czech, I would say.
No. No, it's probably not a common word in English either, but it makes people stop and pause.
Yeah.
So that's maybe a good thing. You said, can I describe a little bit? What if it's more than a little bit?
We have time. We have time.
But not 3 hours now.
2 hours.
2 hours. No, I'm glad to have this conversation. Let me think about how to say it, how I want to say it. Early on in our project, we became very interested. Okay, if we want classrooms to be a place of rich thinking, and we want to make cultures of thinking, a classroom where thinking is visible, then what kind of thinking do we want to make visible? And so it took us to a place of asking ourselves, okay, when humans try to understand things, are there certain thinking moves or maneuvers, that could be another word there, are there certain thinking moves that humans make when they try to understand things? So don't be teacher right now, just be human, right? Humans try to understand lots of things. For example, my iPhone in my pocket, it updated overnight, and now I'm looking at it and I'm trying to figure out how does this work? It's a silly thing to try to understand, but in that moment, okay, how do I attach a text and I want to send my mother a photo? How do I do that now? It looks different, right? So are there thinking moves that I can make to help me in that? That's a silly thing. Let's go to something more serious. I don't know if you know this or not, but in my country we have new leadership. And you noticed? Yeah. And I find myself trying to understand all sorts of things right now. I'll say it that way. I'm trying to understand, what does this mean if this program gets cut? What does this mean if these policies are made? I look at what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. I look at in Palestine and Israel, and I'm trying to understand it. Are there thinking moves I have to bring to try to understand what's going on in the world? I would consider that very heavyweight compared to trying to figure out my iPhone. But whether it's something silly or something serious, are there high leverage thinking moves that humans make when they try to understand things? That was the premise. Do we know anything about high leverage moves, like best bet moves? So one move that humans make a lot is just looking closely. What do I see? What do I notice? Like humans do that a lot. I do that when I'm trying to figure out my iPhone. I do that when I'm looking at my daughter and she's not acting quite right. And what do I see? What do I notice? She's a little quiet. What's happening here? A lot of times then that leads me to another move, like building explanations. Oh, I think this is what's going on. I've got a theory. Right? Humans do that a lot. What do I see? What do I notice? What do I think could be going on here? Humans reason with evidence. What makes me say that? Oh, I think maybe she got, maybe she's not having a good time at school. I have a theory, maybe because she's not talking about her friends right now. Or maybe I have another theory. Maybe she's feeling sick. She's coming down with something. What makes me say that? Well, it's winter and flu is going around. Right? So humans look closely, we build theories, we reason with evidence. Those are moves that humans make a lot. Sometimes when we try to understand things, we look for connections. What is this like? How does this fit? Sometimes when we try to understand things, we look at things from different points of view. Like, I think this is a great idea. There's a lot of people who don't think it's a good idea. What do they see that I don't? And if I can step out of my shoes and step into their shoes, maybe I will change my mind. Maybe I won't. But my understanding will be better. So in our work, looking closely, making connections, reasoning with evidence, uncovering complexity, we were trying to notice and name powerful thinking moves that humans do. Harvard University researchers did not invent these moves, and then humans began to do them. We didn't make a poster and then humans started to do. It's the other way around. We were interested, what kind of moves do humans make when they try to understand stuff? Because if we can notice it and name it, then it puts us in a better position to create conditions to grow those things, right? So I often say to people, Harvard didn't invent these moves. What our project tried to do is illuminate these moves. We're trying to make them visible, prominent. Why? Because they're pretty good moves to make. And they're very good moves to make when you're 15, and they're good moves to make when you're 25, with facing the kinds of things that 25-year-olds face. They're good moves to make when you're 54. Yeah. Because they try to help, these moves help us understand our world. Right?
Yeah. You obviously used a good thinking moves on the way to describe those thinking moves, right?
Got the moves. You got to move it.
I'd like to speak a little bit about the first one. It looks like very simple, but I think it's quite crucial and important, like observing and watching closely and noticing. Because, most of the time at schools, we tell students, or we give students tasks they will be working on, right? We tell them, like, solve these linear equations, right? Or find all the verbs in the paragraph, or maybe sort animals into different animal groups, right? So they know what they are supposed to do, and they do it, right? But I think the drawback of this detailed instruction is that they do not have to observe, right? They do not have to notice. So they do not have to decide what's going on. And they do not have to decide whether there is any problem, right? There is not actually a problem, right? So what do you think about like this, maybe let's call it over-instruction, or maybe I think in your book you call it over-planning, right?
You've done your research.
I mean, I use your book for 7 years, quite commonly.
I'm honored because if it's added value to what you're trying to grow,
I think it's added value to all our teachers. Actually, thank you for that.
No, I feel the same. I'm very grateful. I think that's when I. As a teacher, when I'm over planning or when I'm over directing, well, if I don't give any directions, things can fall apart, right? But if I give so many directions and I tell them everything to do, then how is it empowering them to do the thinking? Sometimes what I have found in my own experience, because I wanted my students to get it, I wanted them to get it. I planned it all out and put all the boxes there so they could get it. But yeah, I perhaps took all the thinking opportunities away for them. Yeah. And so therefore, I'm not anti-giving directions, but I'm thinking, what kinds of tools and structures do I want to put in my classroom so that these thinking moves. No more thinking over here. That's a clear communication there. After those nice things I just said, unplug that.
Not me. All the audience has to be somebody from.
Yeah, you're keeping me on my toes over here. But these, I want to make these give tools and structures so that these become real patterns of behavior. So that, let's say, I'm looking at a set of data. We've collected some data in my 7th grade mathematics class, or with the 12-year-olds, the 13-year-olds, and we take a look. So what do we see? What do we notice? What do we think's going on here? So what would happen after 100 more times or 1,000 more times? Can you know? What makes you say that? Right? I'm trying to get them to notice, it's something that's linear or something that's exponential or something that's quadratic. So I want to not just march them through the directions. I want to give them the experience where they're making these moves, because the role that you're cast in the most is the role you get good at. So I want to get my students really good at looking closely, developing theories, reasoning with evidence.
Yeah. And I think it's crucial to learn how to notice, right? Like successful people, they usually notice, right? They usually notice the opportunity and then they follow the opportunity, right? Like many other people just go along, right?
That's indeed what you said is true. And I was also thinking that sometimes people don't see and notice. People have already developed a theory, and so then they only see and notice the things that confirm their theory. Yeah. And so therefore, they've already made the inference. They've jumped to a conclusion, and then therefore they miss a lot of the details. And so many years ago, everything feels like a few years ago, but it was many years ago. There was a book that I read called How Doctors Think. It was written by, I can't remember the name of the author, but they gave many examples from some teaching hospitals where the doctors were teaching young doctors to become, they were interns. And there was one doctor in Massachusetts General Hospital, somewhere near Boston, in Boston. She used to say to her medical students, let me get this right. She used to say, don't just do something, stand there. The English phrase generally is, don't just stand there, do something. Right? That's generally the phrase. Yeah. But she turned it to the opposite with the young doctors. She said, don't just do something, stand there. Her point being is, sometimes you just rush, and you don't see and notice things. And so if you have somebody who has a cough and a fever, okay, it's flu. And the next person, it's flu. And the next patient, it's flu. The next person that comes in with those same symptoms, they diagnose it as flu because they already have it in their mind that it must be flu. And they miss the fact that this person has maybe just come back from, I don't know, being in the jungles in Central America, and it could be something else, right? And so the idea of just practicing that thinking move of seeing and noticing, the longer we look, the more we can see. And I think school sometimes becomes a place where we are just trying to get through the exercises, and we miss that move.
Okay. Okay. Now I have a question about wondering and asking questions.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Is this helpful so far? Is this okay so far?
Yeah.
Yeah? Oh, that was 2 thumbs up in the back? Okay. I see and notice that.
Yeah. I find it interesting that most of the questions at schools usually come from teachers to students, right? But I would rather prefer students to learn how to ask like deep and open-ended questions that would pursue them for a longer period of time and would be kind of leading questions. Even they might not have one correct answer. Right. And I've been working most of my life as a manager, and I know what I noticed actually, that sometimes it's quite difficult to find the question. But once you find the question, you have already 2/3 of the solution. Right. So how can we help children to learn to ask those kind of leading questions that can lead us or move us forward or take us forward?
Well, how do we create conditions where that's valued, right? And trying to, so why aren't kids asking those questions? Well, maybe they don't know what thinking questions could be. So we have to model that for them. Even the question stems here, what do you see, what do you notice? So I'm going to ask that of you, but I want you to ask that of yourself as a learner. What do I see, what do I notice, right? I want that to become a habit. What kind of connections? How is this related? How does this fit? I think it must say something like that there in Czech with the connection making. You thought, wow, he's so good. But I believe, how does this fit? What is this like? I want to model those questions. I want that, and I want to have a lot of interactions around that. I want to have a lot of language for that, because I want them to be able to ask those questions themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And Vygotsky, the Russian psychologist of many years ago, said it's a truism of parenting that children grow into the intellectual life around them. Children learn what they live with. So are there some parents here tonight? Yeah, and there must be some parents online watching right now. So that baby did not talk to you. The baby made its needs known when they needed to be changed or fed. But scroll up until like when they're 4 years old. Did anybody ever have the experience where, I don't know, maybe you're stuck in traffic and you're late it's a little tense, and your voice comes out of the 4-year-old's body, or your partner's voice comes out, right? And you think, oh, that child is just spoke the words. Okay, right? We've all had that, right? It's actually quite miraculous. This little baby, in a very short period of time, started to take on the language of the household. Not just the vocabulary, but also the timing, right? Children learn what they live with. So in schools, it becomes interesting. What's the language that they hear from us that they grow into? What kind of, so you asked about questions. If they're going to ask these questions, where do they hear these questions a lot? You said many times the teacher's asking the questions and the students aren't. I had the experience when I was teaching. I taught primary school, the 8, 9-year-olds for some time, and then I taught 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds for most of the time. But I remember students asking questions. How long does this have to be? How many points is this worth? Do I have to show my work on this? Is this going to be on the test? Anybody here, teachers? Have you heard those kinds of questions from students? Those are not natural questions. 3-year-olds do not ask that question. I haven't seen a 3-year-old say, how many points is this worth? Is this going to be on the test? No, 3-year-olds ask why. But why? Right? So when I've got an 11-year-old saying, how long does this have to be? Is this on the test 12? Those are all questions about managing the work. Those are not questions of curiosity and looking closely and uncovering complexity. So where did the children learn to ask those questions? They've grown into that. Somehow, some way, they got the message through the culture. This is what's valued here. That's a little disheartening, but it's also promising. Because if a student can learn to ask, how long does this have to be? How many points? If they can learn that, they can also learn to ask, well, how does that fit? What is that like? What's another angle on this? What's another perspective? Students can learn to ask those questions too. But what's it going to take from us to ask those questions a lot? In school, maybe also at home with parents. What do you see and what do you notice? What do you think is going to happen here? What makes you say that? You asked about how parents can help. I think being conscious of showing that curiosity and modeling those questions can go a long way.
Yeah. We actually use the concept of big question, like integrating subject into big questions. And you mentioned big questions, right? So we basically took the idea from David Perkins, which you probably work with, right, in Harvard, right? And so how do you think this concept of big questions or integrated questions, big questions help to create the environment where the thinking moves can be and the culture of thinking can be created?
Well, I don't know exactly how you've played it out here, but from the little bit that I heard, and also knowing the work that you're doing around inquiry, I think when there are big questions that you're trying to pursue, big questions often have lots of ways of looking at them, right? So it's already creating the conditions, right? Having some driving questions, some big questions, creates a lot of opportunity for looking and then looking more closely. Having big questions creates opportunities for us to look at things from different points of view. So I think if I'm just learning about this topic and covering these skills in service of what? What questions are we really trying to understand? Yeah. I want to say just a little story of a teacher's example from many years ago, and it's just come to my mind right now. I'm thinking about the role of questions and inviting students to ask questions. This was a 9th grade teacher, so the 14-year-olds turning 15. This was in New York City, so it was a high school. It was a world history course, and they were studying world religions. In particular, they were studying the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, that came from Abraham. Okay. So they're studying these 3 major world religions. And she asked the students, what are the questions you have about this topic? Okay. So the students all wrote questions, and she gathered the questions, and she brought them to a teacher study group. And we looked at the questions to try to see what are kids curious about. What are they interested in? Just somehow to get their voice in the mix. When we looked at the questions, some of the questions were answerable. What is the name of the hat that Jewish men wear on their heads? That question has an answer to it. Okay? What do the Islamic people call priests? What is that called? That has an answer to it. But there were some questions the students asked that were different. Some of the questions were things like, why do people hold on to these ancient faiths when bad things happen to them? Well, what's the answer to that? There's not an answer to that, but there are perspectives to that. So we saw more things like that. Why do people feel the need for religion? Does this really exist? And does God exist? Or things like that. She got the questions back to the students, and she asked them to sort which ones feel like they're answerable and which questions feel like they are perspectable. That's not really an English word. Thank you, translator. Thank you, interpreter. Which ones require perspective seeking, considering perspectives? So, thank you. So they put the questions on the board. And so then as they studied their lessons about Christianity and Islam, and there was an imam from the mosque who came and gave a talk. They went to visit the Jewish museum. Every time they had experiences, they kept coming back to their questions. Where did we find some answers? Where did we find some perspectives? That created the conditions for students to make these kinds of moves a lot. So in the absence of having those questions, they could have just studied about Christianity, they could have studied about Judaism, they could have studied about Islam, and they could have had a test on it and been done. But the role of those questions, I think, create lots and lots of thinking opportunities if we honor them.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for that, because I think you're talking a lot now about concerning different viewpoints and perspectives, right? And I think it's so crucial in today's world, to be able to listen to each other, right? And to learn from each other, right? And take different perspectives. And
this is one American who thinks definitely yes.
Yeah.
There's another American in the room that I know also thinks definitely yes. So, but we're not very good examples of that right now.
Yeah. I know one American who thinks the opposite, probably. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
I think it's vital. I think how can we understand one another unless we try to understand each other's points of view?
Yeah. Okay. And in your books, maybe let's get back to your making thinking visible books. Actually, as I said, I use them for several years quite commonly. not only when I work with kids, but also when I work with adults. Actually, it's great because it's worse for small children, age of 4 till whenever, right? And what I really like about the books is that they can become very powerful tool for basically any teacher who wants to create a thinking classroom, right? And I think I like them for 2 reasons. Because you use thinking routines, and the thinking routines are not complicated. I mean, they are quite. As I said, I saw 4-year-old children using them, right? Being engaged, understanding them fully, right? And the second thing is that most of the thinking routines, they open the space rather than closing it down. So I wanted to ask you how you get to the idea of thinking routines and what it actually is.
Yeah.
For somebody who has not worked with the book for 7 years.
Yeah. No, gladly. So one of the things that makes a culture, right? My classroom is a culture. It sends messages to my students about what's valued. So the language I use, the interactions I have, where we spend time, what gets modeled, the expectations I communicate, the environment, all of those things send messages. We call them cultural forces. These are forces that give shape to the culture. Another cultural force is the routines we put in place. The routines that we put in place send messages that this is what we do here. We can study our language, we can study time, we can study opportunities and really reflect on that and think, is that really inviting these moves? But why maybe you're finding routines so practical is classrooms are full of routines. Anytime a teacher has a behavior that she wants her students to do consistently, she will put a routine in place so that they can do it. It becomes routine, it becomes normal, it becomes regular. So for example, teachers put in what we would say in English housekeeping routines to just do housekeeping items. Like, for example, when we leave this room, we put the chairs to the side, right, so that this room can be used after school, right? We practice it once, we practice it twice, and it's just our routine. When we leave the classroom, we tidy up. The materials go into the buckets go to the shelf. We practice it once, we practice it twice, it becomes a routine. So much so that if I am called away on an appointment and Cindy is going to cover my class, I'll say, just tell the students to tidy up. They know what to do because it's a routine. They know exactly what to do. It's not an activity. It's something they have done. It's a rehearsed set of movements that make up a performance, right? So classrooms have housekeeping routines for housekeeping behaviors. Schools have safety routines for safety behaviors. Like if there is an emergency and we have to get out, you must do that here. I can't imagine you don't.
It's not
right?
difficult, but we do.
Yeah, but you practice the evacuation drill. You practice it once, practice it twice, right? Because it's a routine. If we need the behavior, we've got a routine in place to do the behavior. So we began to wonder if classrooms have housekeeping routines for housekeeping behaviors, and emergency routines for emergency behaviors and management routines for management behaviors. Why wouldn't classrooms have thinking routines when certain thinking behaviors are needed? So if we have read a new text and it's giving us another point of view, we've got some routines around considering viewpoints. If this is a moment where we want to look closely and really look closely, we have a routine for that. So that's sort of the bigger idea. If classrooms already have routines for behaviors, if we want these thinking moves to become a behavior, we should probably put routines in place for that too.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite thinking routine?
Oh, you're going to make me make a choice.
You don't have to if you don't.
No, do I have a favorite? Well, I see connect, extend, challenge right there. I know the people on YouTube can't see that, and it's a little bit behind the bright light for our filming purposes. Connect, extend, challenge. That was a favorite of mine. I was a mathematics teacher for a long time. And here's what I noticed, that when I reflected on which of my students over the many years that I taught, which of my students really were powerful in mathematics. Like they didn't just learn the tricks, not that I was teaching tricks, but they could walk to new situations. They were really skilled. I would always have students that would, like if the class is finished and they're leaving and I'm erasing the whiteboard, a student comes up to me and says, Mr. Church, this problem we did today, it's like the other one, except this time it's flipped around. Yeah. Okay? And I would say, okay, bye, go to science. But now when I look back at it, what that student was doing was looking for connections. This and this one is like the other ones, except here's where it's different. I could start recalling a lot of my students who were doing that. And then it's like they were making connections. And they were doing that in the wild. They weren't doing it because I asked for it. They were doing it because it was part of who they were. They were making connections as part of what they were doing to understand. And then it became a very interesting thing for me. It's like if a few 11 and 12-year-olds could do this in the wild, there's got to be more 11 and 12-year-olds who could do it if we started to farm it, if we started to make it routine. So connect, extend, challenge became a real favorite of mine because we would do a problem set and I would stop and ask the kids, okay, how does this problem set connect with the other problems we did? How did this problem set extend our thinking, give us new ideas? Challenge. What makes this problem set challenging? What do we have to keep our eyes on and look closely at? And I just found so many places along the way when we were doing our mathematics that I could just pause and say, how does this connect? How does this extend? How does this connect? How does this extend? Because I want them to be able to do that without me, right? Because I know it's powerful. Yeah. That's a favorite.
Yeah. Mark, it's so inspiring talking to you, but I'm just watching the time.
It's time. Yes.
And I would like to leave some space for the audience to ask questions. So now I have the last one, actually. What are the main lessons you have learned throughout the years of your work with teachers worldwide? What are the main lessons you have learned on your way working with teachers?
I love that question because I will keep thinking about that question over the coming days. I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned along the way is don't underestimate our students' or children's capabilities. I've had so many teachers who say, once they try to make their students' thinking visible, they say, wow, that one student who never talks, she really had some really interesting things to say. I was blown away. And then there becomes another awakening. It's like they say, maybe that student always had these ideas, but I never had space for it. And then the third thing is, oh, I can actually create conditions where I could get their thinking visible more and more. And so the number one thing is just this, I've just become even more a believer of the capability of our students, all our students, and a big believer in teachers. If teachers become curious about students and their thinking, I think beautiful things happen. So I don't know if that's the biggest lesson learned, but it's the most inspiring one.
Yeah. It makes me almost cry.
Oh, it's like a Hollywood movie.
Okay, so now it's your turn. And I think we have a microphone, right?
Yeah, you have to speak in the microphone because you do it in Czech.
Yeah, so Matthias, our student will pass the microphone, yeah?
Hey, Mark. Can I talk in English? Do you mind?
You can.
First of all, thank you so much. Very inspiring talk. To be honest with you, it made me a little bit nervous. Being a parent and also an ex-teacher, because, now I'm thinking like, am I making the thinking visible enough for my kids? But thank you for that. Actually, it's a great reflection for myself. But my question goes to, you were talking a lot about, what the stance and opinions of teachers are about how they teach and whether they should teach more for content or for thinking. And you were also talking about over-directing students. And what my past experiences have been is that sometimes the students, when you stop over-directing, are quite resistant, right? They suddenly feel lost somehow, and they might even, lose motivation, and they might think, oh my gosh, this guy suddenly is doing something else than we ever did before. And it might become, I think, a hurdle on their way to, become better thinkers, deeper thinkers, to make their thinking visible. How would you support, such students or kids or whoever, even adults, and how would you help them to get over this initial resistance, which might, I think, hinder some of them to even progress?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, my pleasure, and thanks for using the mic, because the interpreter could then give your voice in Czech. Yeah. I think you are recognizing that, sometimes I've had some secondary school teachers in particular who will say, I tried some thinking stuff, right? I tried something, but my students said, yeah, but what are the notes? Just give me the notes, right? And so they have some resistance, right? Because those students have an image of what school is or what learning is, and it's become deeply ingrained. So I do have empathy, like too unfamiliar too soon can cause some resistance, right? And so that is a little bit like if I take away the script that you've always played and now put a new script, of course there's going to be a learning curve with that. And so I think a lot of patience in that. I think having some clarity about what kind of thinking move do I want to help you get better at, and also even telling the students, I've noticed a lot of you are just memorizing, but you're not uncovering complexity. So I want to help you with that. And so I think it takes that kind of interaction and patience to try it. The other thing that I was thinking when you were asking your question is, I had a teacher in Australia some years ago. She said, the more I work with these ideas, I'm thinking about myself now, sort of her metaphor or image. She said, as a driver's education instructor. She wasn't. She was English language arts or something like that. She said, but if I'm a driving instructor, my goal is to keep the steering wheel in the student driver's hands as much of the time as possible. Right? That's the goal. Now, that doesn't mean on day one, I just hear the keys, good luck, right? We work towards that. But I always have the goal in mind is to keep the steering wheel in their hands as much as possible. Now, I can take the wheel, she said, and I can get us from point A to point B, and I can get us there quickly and safely and efficiently. Nothing wrong with that. We like to get to places safely and efficiently. But she said, the more I do that, that's no longer driver's training. That's chauffeur service. That's taxi. And that's a different function, right? And so she said, now I have to realize that I've done that a lot. I've taxied my students through this. I did all the driving for them. So I can't just expect to hand over the keys and they can drive. So if that imagery helps for teachers that are wanting to give a try, it's like, how do I start getting the wheel in their hands more? And I can tap on the brake if we start to swerve too much. I can grab the wheel if we start to go for a ditch. I just don't want to do that all the time, or else I take that power away from them. So that's another way of just having patience and thinking, these moves aren't taught in a lesson. They have to be grown over time. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it's a perspective. Double thumbs up again. Keep that one. Have her come back.
Dobrý večer. Můžu mluvit česky, prosím?
Good evening. I'm going to speak in Czech. Good evening once again. I am Petr Diamant. I'm from a community school. And my question is very simple. Is there a course that would help us, educators, teachers, develop the thinking culture? Thank you.
Short answer to a simple question. Harvard Project Zero does have some online courses. And in fact, I teach some of those. And they have, there is a course called Visible Thinking in particular. And people sign up in teams. And so the idea is as a team, you read some things, you meet together, talk, and then post some things. And that goes over a series of weeks. I'm not here to sell the courses or anything. But what's powerful about that is it gets people talking in a team together. So those courses are available most certainly. So if you look Project Zero online, Harvard Project Zero online learn, you'd find it. Also just picking up a book and reading the book and having a study together is my advice. It's when people read something, talk together, try something, and bring back what you tried, that's the number one thing that I see gets people to put ideas into action and learn from it. So there are courses available, but don't underestimate your own opportunity to study with one another. I don't know if the books are translated in text or in Czech, but I think you probably know how to manage those things.
Yeah. They are not translated, but they are quite easy to read, actually, compared to Future-wise, like the book about the big questions, right? That was a tough book to read, actually. But making thinking visible, because it's so practical, right? It's got like 40 pages, like the major ideas we are talking about, right? And then it's about the thinking routines. Yeah. So it's kind of very practical. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, Mark, we have a couple questions from our YouTube viewers on the stream. So the first one is from the Zuzana, and she's asking, the rewards for thinking is often the Heuréka moment. I want my teenage kids to experience that. However, I'm afraid it has to happen quickly or they lose interest. Can we think deeply and fast?
Let me make sure I understand the question. She said she wants her teenage kids. Say that again.
She wants her teenage kids to experience the Heuréka moment.
The what movement? The Heuréka movement.
Heuréka.
Gotcha. Well, I'll let you speak to that, but the...
I didn't get the point as well.
Yeah. But I think like the teenagers, what can they think deeply and fast? You know what? I think we have lots of examples where we see teenagers figure lots of things out. The things that they're interested in and motivated by, they figure that out pretty fast, right? I was at a boys' school some years ago in Australia, and some of the teachers said, "Oh, it was boys, and they were teenage boys, and they come in here and they just sit on the log like they can't do any thinking." But when I see them outside on the rugby pitch, and they don't have enough players, and they don't have all the equipment, but they figure out all sorts of things, like how to make it work, right? So they have the capacity to think. I think, so therefore, can teenagers think and think deeply? Oh, any issue of fairness, any issue of truth, I mean, those are two things that come to mind. Fairness and truth, they're obsessed with things like that. They have opinions, they have thoughts. So I think creating the space to involve them in big dialogue. So what do you think about that? What makes you say that? I have a lot of hope in teenagers because I don't think that they are just passive recipients. I think we see that in school sometimes because school made them that way. Wow, right at the end. I don't want to speak poorly of school, but I just think that sometimes school, unfortunately, turns it into this game, and then teenagers become very savvy with their time. I'll play the game, or I won't, but some will just, I'll play the game so that at 3:30, when that bell rings, I can go out and then really live the life that's interesting to me. And that bothers me because I think our teenagers have a lot to say and a lot of things to do. So there is hope. Just create the space to get them to talk about the things they really want to talk about.
And what I actually learned that if you create a respectful environment and thoughtful environment, it's I had quite interesting and deep discussions about their learning. Actually, I teach teenagers, right? Yeah. So and they have many thoughts about their learning and how it was very useful. It helped me to understand their learning, and I think I helped them to move forward in their learning, right?
And I think that something that I imagine you bring to it is that the students recognize that you're genuinely interested in what they have to say. So maybe it goes back to the friend there who was asked the first question about the resistance. Maybe the first time through, the students think, like the teacher just said, "What makes you say that? What, did I get it wrong? Did I get it wrong? What, is this not right?" Okay, the second time through, "What makes you say that?" Third time, "Oh, he's genuinely interested in what makes me say that." And so it takes a little bit of time for that. But if the students feel like their ideas, if the children feel like their ideas are being taken seriously and respect, like we said, I think they rise to the occasion. Do we have another one?
Yes, another question is from Marcela, and she is asking, you have mentioned that the arts were also included in your research in Project Zero. What role does art play in the thinking moves?
Oh, well, you know, so the work around visible thinking, cultures of thinking, hasn't had a direct arts component. Project Zero research has a long history of that. But there are some colleagues at Project Zero that did studio habits, really thinking about what kind of thinking moves are really required to both create and represent in the arts. And so, if Marcella wants to go to the Project Zero website, any of you can look up, if you look up Harvard Project Zero, you will find their website, and it has all the different research projects there. And she can most certainly look at the arts ones in particular.
Yeah, there's one which is called Artful Thinking, right? Did you work on that one as well?
I had a little bit of work to do with that, and a lot of that has to do with, it's many of these same things. What are the dispositions as we think? And certainly art gives us lots of ways of looking at big ideas and issues that can't be looked at directly, right? Art gives us taps into another part of our brain. But many of the other researchers would be able to speak more to that than me.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Any more questions?
Maybe I have one comment. Do we have the mic?
We need the mic.
Yeah. I have to say I like very much your scheme over there, but there is one thing which I'm missing in it, and it's a need of recurrence. When you ask a question based on your observation, usually to make up a theory, you have to go back and observe more. And it has to be done in each of your steps.
Yeah. Often, this particular graphic is, there's been lots of graphics of these thinking moves out there. This one, I like it. It does feel a little bit linear. And there are other ones that are more circular, because it isn't like this happens and then this happens and this happens.
So it's a pyramid more.
Yeah, a pyramid could be one, a circle, a net. We were interested, is there a hierarchy? And we just saw too many examples where there was no hierarchy. Sometimes the way into understanding something is looking closely. But sometimes the way into understanding something is starting with that reference or inference, and then what did I see that makes me say that? And so it should feel very fluid. I want my students and all learners to have a lot of back and forth between these.
There's a lot of flexibility, but there is definitely some causality between the moves. So it's not organized, non-organized, but it's not linear, definitely.
That's right. It's not linear. Often one can lead to the other, and that goes back and forth. And I think that then goes into depth.
Yeah.
That goes to depth. There is one thinking routine, see, think, wonder. Maybe the teachers of this school know that one. What do I see? What do I think is going on here? What does that make me wonder? It's very simple, but yet it is a very powerful move. See, think, wonder. I have a video of a teacher of 10-year-olds looking at various children around the world and living in different conditions. They were studying the rights of the child. She asked them, the students, what do you see in these images? What do you think's going on here? What questions does that raise? Because she wanted them to really try to understand why humans need rights and advocacy. I showed this video once to a group of college professors, university professors, in Guatemala City in Central America. This is a university. A lot of university professors don't think so much about their teaching. They like their subject and their research. But this particular group of professors were very interested in the 19, 20, 21-year-olds as learners. I showed this video of the teacher of the 10-year-olds doing see, think, wonder. And there was the School of Medicine and the School of Psychology and the School of Law and the School of Economics. As soon as it was over, the School of Medicine, the doctor said, see, think, wonder, that's what we do as doctors. Because when we have patients, it's what do we see? What do we think's going on here? What does that make us wonder? Which then leads us back to seeing and thinking and wondering, right? That cyclical nature that you were saying. But as soon as they said that, the school of law, the lawyers said, no. See, think, wonder, that's our thinking routine. Because when we're putting together a case, that's what we have to do. What do we see? What do we think? What do we wonder? And then the school of psychology jumps in, and the school of economics. No. See, think, wonder, it's ours. And so it was a fascinating experience for me that all of these disciplines at the university, they didn't just see this thinking routine as a little activity. They saw it as patterns of thinking that you have to bring if you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a person in business. And so that's what we really want. That's the goal of all of this, is to develop students' thinking dispositions flexibly and powerfully.
Dobrý večer. Moc děkuju za krásný večer. Napadla mě při vašem povídání.
Good evening. Thank you for this lovely evening. One idea.
Jsem rodič.
I've got one idea. I'm a parent. I'm not a teacher. My younger son is 3-year-old, so I keep answering his questions all day long. What, who, why? So I almost do not have any ideas of my own. My daughter doesn't do it, and he is very unhappy when I reply, I don't know. I always thought that I don't know was absolutely fine, but he always says, Mom, why do you say that? And I say, because I do not know how to answer your question. But my son, he's so unhappy, he's not satisfied if he hears me saying, I don't know. Does that mean? Well, I think what he expects from me at that moment. So sometimes we go and seek the answer, but I do not know whether I've chosen the right answer. Because the fact that I do not know is something that makes him wonder and makes him search for the answers. What do you think about it?
Well, I think you have a great 3-year-old. Yeah. I don't know the situation you're living in there, but what he will know is if his parents are curious and want to engage in conversation. Maybe he's not satisfied with the answer. I don't know. You might even say, how could we figure it out? Yeah. Or what do you think? It could be interesting to engage in that. Again, I don't know if a 3-year-old is going to stick with you on that. But what I do know is a child will know whether the parents are genuinely curious or not. And so I just wish you well with that. Let him always know that his mother was curious in his thinking. And that's what I would say. I'll leave parenting to you.
Hi. If it works, I'll speak in English also. So I think the question is, can we overdo it? Right? Because what I'm wondering, and I would say I'm one of those curious parents that, let's say, when we find out something, I'm just trying, oh, that's cute, that's great, let's just go and try to find out how it works, right? Or something like that. But the thing is, can we just, let's say, in this, informational heavy times that we're living in, can we maybe just overdo it and get to a stage where this kind of, oh, let's explore it together, let's just figure it out together, is going to be like, but why don't we just put it in ChatGPT and we're going to know the answer, right? So why are you doing these dumb kind of, let's say, thinking when the answer was already out there, right? So,
you know, that will be kind of interesting to see where things go, especially as artificial intelligence continues to develop. But I'd be curious to see what ChatGPT has to say. Why do people hold on to ancient faiths when bad things happen to them? That question that those ninth graders asked. That's not an answerable question, right? But in that case, in that I was talking about earlier, but those religions, the Christianity has something to say about that. Judaism has something to say about Islam. So as they were studying those religions, they kept gathering perspectives. So, yeah, why are we doing a big thinking thing if it is an answerable thing, right? So that's maybe where it's overdoing. It's like kind of knowing what are the questions we really want to ask. What's the question under the question that is worth digging into? And then for other things, when it's a need to know, why don't we just need to know it, you know, figure it out. That's just sort of what my gut tells me. And so overdoing it isn't what I worry about so much as thinking about when it feels purposeful, or otherwise it might feel contrite.
Thank you. We had fifth graders actually who were working on a research, how do people live in different corners of the world, and you can probably somehow do it through ChatGPT. It would be worthless, right? But if you do real research, if the kids do real research, they really speak to, I don't know, 15 different people from real different corners, from Japan to Ghana to Costa Rica and so on. So then they get much deeper, right? And they can sort the data they found. They wrote books, actually 2 books. One was about the data, one was about what was actually stories which they made, like if they would live in that countries. And that was a 2 months big question. It was last year, and it still goes on. It actually ended up in writing letters to Syrian school kids. So it went through a long process. It's still alive. So, and that's something which ChatGPT cannot do, right, for the students.
Yeah. You have to bring real intelligence, not the artificial intelligence, to that.
Yeah. And real person, right?
Yeah.
Okay, if there is no more question, I have the final one, actually, which I promised to ask you. And the question is, we ask you many questions.
81. Did I get it right?
Yes. No, the question is, was there any question we didn't ask you and you would like to answer? And that was the only question we agreed, actually. So you shall be prepared for that.
Did we agree on that? Yeah. Did we agree on that?
But 81 is fine as well.
Okay. I think a question around how does somebody get started, and what's some of your advice on getting started?
Okay, so what's your advice on getting started? That's the nice final question.
Yeah, my advice on getting started is, be biased towards taking action. Try something. If you're a classroom teacher, in particular. But if you're a parent, try having a different kind of conversation. Rather than answering it, say, well, what's your gut tell you? What makes you say that? Look for those moments to try that in your parenting interactions. With teachers, sometimes if a teacher says, oh, I don't think my students can do this, so I can't do this, maybe say, I don't think my students can do it, so I must do this. Like, I don't think that teachers are invited to play and experiment. enough. Now, I mean, first, do no harm, you know, and really do right by the families that you serve. But experiment with an idea, because I think that's where new insights get born. And I think sometimes people wait till things are perfect to make something happen. And I would just like to say things don't have to be perfect to be wonderful. And so that's my advice, and that's a good place to get started. Don't wait for perfection. Just try.
Yeah, and I think those are perfect final words, actually. Thank you for them, and thank you for the whole evening, and thank you for coming, all of you, to Libochovičky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.